The snow had started falling harder that morning, each flake like a tiny betrayal against a man already buried in cold. Ethan Hale pressed his palm against the cracked glass of the bakery window and stared in at the last 2 loaves of bread sitting behind the fogged-up display case. He hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, half a can of beans split with his daughter. Or rather what he still called his daughter. Technically, she was now in her mother's custody 3 states away. And he hadn't held her in 6 months. A father without a child. A man without a job. And now after today a man without heat. He turned away from the glass, clutching his coat tighter, more out of habit than warmth, and trudged through the snow toward the industrial end of town. Past the mills that had long since closed. Past the shelters that were full by noon. Past the corner where yesterday he'd seen something that kept clawing at his chest. 2 little girls. Matching red scarves. Bare hands and hollow eyes. And a woman, too polished, too detached, leading them to a rusted van. He hadn't intervened then. Hadn't known what he was seeing. Only that something had felt off. Deeply off. Now as he approached the same intersection he stopped dead in his tracks. The van was back. But the woman was gone. And the girls were still sitting there. Alone. Huddled together on a snow-caked bench. Same scarves. Same empty eyes. One of them had her head resting on the other's lap. Neither moved when he approached. "Hey," he said gently. "Where's your mom?" The girl on the bench looked up. Her lips were cracked and pale. "She's not our mom," she whispered. Ethan's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" "She said someone was coming to get us. A man. He's going to buy us." He looked around, stomach dropping. No one in sight. 1,000 thoughts raced through his head. Fear. Doubt. Consequences. But louder than them all was something else. His daughter's face. Her laugh. Her tears on the last day he'd held her hand through family court. Ethan dropped to his knees eye level with the girls. "I'm not rich," he said softly, "and I can't buy anything. But if you want, I can take you somewhere warm. Somewhere safe." The girl nodded slowly. And that's how it started. Not with a plan. Not with permission. But with a man who had lost everything. And 2 girls who had never had anything at all. The girls didn't say much on the way back to Ethan's apartment. They just held hands tightly in the back seat of his beat-up Honda, legs swinging over the edge. The silence was too heavy for children, the kind that only comes from knowing too much too early. Ethan stole glances at them through the rearview mirror. One had a bruise fading beneath her right eye. The other had fingernail marks along her wrist. He swallowed the rising anger. The heater in the car barely worked, but the girls didn't complain. He drove slowly, as if a fast turn or a sudden stop might shatter the fragile sense of safety they were building moment by moment. When they reached his place, a second-floor studio above a shuttered auto parts store, the girls looked around cautiously as if waiting for the catch. "This is where I live," Ethan said awkwardly. "It's small. But it's warm. And safe. You can take off your coats. Bathroom's there. You hungry?" They nodded. He warmed up the last of the lentil soup he'd made 3 days ago, split into 2 bowls. He didn't take any for himself. They didn't notice, or maybe they did but were too polite to say. Only after the bowls were scraped clean did one of them speak. "I'm Callie," the twin with the bruised cheek said. "I'm Clara," the other added. "Nice to meet you," Ethan replied gently. "I'm Ethan. You 2 got any family I can call?" Clara's eyes darted toward the window. Callie's voice was small. "We had a dad. He died. Then our stepmom said she didn't want us. She said we were too expensive." Ethan felt something in his chest crack open. Has anyone hurt you?" Callie nodded. "Once. She said a man was going to pick us up from the bench. She said he'd give her money. And then we'd be his. Like puppies." The words made Ethan nauseous. He knew what he had to do. Call someone. Report it. But then what? Foster care? Maybe together. Maybe split. Maybe shuffled house to house like furniture. Maybe forgotten. Like so many others. He sat at the edge of the bed watching them curl into each other on the futon. Eyes already closing. Bodies trembling, not from cold anymore, but something deeper. He'd seen that look before. In himself. After the divorce. After the custody hearing. After the nights he stood outside his daughter's school, knowing he wasn't allowed inside. He couldn't call child services. Not yet. Not until he was sure they'd be safe. And so he pulled a blanket over the girls, sat in the corner on the floor with a cup of cold water and stayed awake all night. Watching. Listening. Protecting. Not their father. Not their relative. But maybe, just maybe, the only adult in their life who wouldn't disappear by morning. The banging started just after sunrise. Ethan jolted awake, heart hammering against his ribs. The girls were still asleep, curled together in a tangle of small limbs under the blanket on the futon. He crept to the door, careful not to make a sound, and peeked through the peephole. Two men. One in a black windbreaker, the other in a leather jacket. Neither looked like cops. No badges. No uniforms. But they had the look. The kind of men who didn't knock unless they already knew what was inside. "Open up," one of them shouted. "We know they're in there. You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Ethan's stomach turned. He stepped back, quietly locked the deadbolt and turned to the girls. They were sitting up now, eyes wide. Clara whispered, "Is it him? The man she was talking about?" Ethan nodded. "Maybe. But he's not getting near you." He grabbed his phone. No service. The storm last night must have knocked the tower out again. He needed time. A plan. Somewhere to go. He wrapped the girls in coats, stuffed what little food he had into a grocery bag. Crackers, a jar of peanut butter, 3 apples, and motioned for them to stay quiet. The fire escape. He helped them through the window, lifting each girl carefully onto the icy metal platform, then climbed out himself, pulling the window shut behind him. As they climbed down, a shout came from the front. "Hey, I saw him. Out back." Ethan didn't think. He ran, one girl in each hand, down the alley and toward the bus station. It was 6 blocks away, past the shuttered pharmacy, past the pawn shop where he once sold his wedding ring to buy diapers, past the diner where his ex-wife used to work before she left for good. They ducked inside the terminal, breathless, freezing, terrified. He didn't have a ticket. Didn't have a plan. Just a promise. To protect them. They rode the 9:30 a.m. bus to Harlow, a forgotten town upstate with fewer people, fewer questions, and one friend Ethan still trusted. Maggie. She was the pastor's widow. Ran a tiny soup kitchen from her church basement. Once gave Ethan a cot when he had nowhere to sleep after the divorce. She didn't ask questions. She just made sure people had warm food and warmer hearts. When he showed up on her doorstep, girls in tow, snow caked to his jeans, eyes hollow with exhaustion, Maggie didn't blink. "You look like hell," she said softly. "They've got no one," Ethan choked. "I couldn't leave them." Maggie looked down at the girls, their matching scarves soaked through, eyes full of quiet dread. "Come inside," she whispered. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out." That night, after the girls were tucked into the back room with a borrowed quilt and a lullaby Maggie hummed through tears, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. "I should have called child services," he said. Maggie sipped her tea. "Would you do it differently, knowing they might have been trafficked before sunset?" He didn't answer. "Sometimes," she said, "the world gives you someone else's children to show you how much love you still have left." Ethan wiped his eyes. "But I'm no one, Maggie. I'm broke. I sleep on a futon. I've got nothing to offer them." Maggie reached across the table. "You gave them what no one else did. You saw them." 3 days passed. The girls began to smile. Clara danced in the soup kitchen when Maggie played old Motown records, and Callie started drawing pictures of a house with a red door, 3 stick figures, and a dog. They didn't have a dog, but in the drawing they named him Lucky. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. Until the police showed up. It was early evening. Snow was falling again, soft and slow. Ethan had just finished washing dishes when the church door opened and 2 officers stepped in. One had kind eyes. The other didn't look at Ethan at all. He was already scanning the room, hand on his radio. "We received a tip," the first officer said gently. 2 missing girls. Ages 6. Twin sisters. Matching red scarves. Ethan stepped forward. His voice was calm but his hands shook. "I didn't kidnap them," he said. "They were being sold. Left on a bench. No one was coming back for them." The officer nodded. "We know. We've been tracking that woman, the one who abandoned them. She's part of a known trafficking ring." Ethan exhaled just barely. "But," the other officer added, You still took minors across county lines without notifying authorities. That's complicated. They took statements, talked to Maggie, interviewed the girls. Callie clung to Ethan's side. Don't make us go, she whispered. He's the only one who doesn't leave. The officers didn't make a decision that night. They said they had to report everything to Child Protective Services. We'll call you tomorrow, the kind one said. Ethan barely slept. The next morning he got the call. But it wasn't from CPS. It was from a woman named Marisol James, a social worker who had read the police report and asked for the file personally. She wanted to meet. They arranged to speak at the church. Marisol was sharp, compassionate, direct. Ethan, she said, these girls need stability, permanency. And you're not on paper the obvious choice. You have no custody of your own daughter. No steady income. No formal training. He looked down. I know. But, she added, they've bonded with you. Strongly. And I've read the report from the arresting officer. He said you risked your own safety to protect them. You never tried to hide. You did everything you could to make them feel safe. She leaned forward. I've also been given access to a private grant program. It's part of a pilot initiative that helps place high-risk kids with real caregivers who've demonstrated integrity and empathy, even without the perfect background. It's rarely approved. But in your case, I'm willing to push it through. Ethan stared, stunned. You mean? Marisol smiled. You could adopt them. Legally. Fully. And the grant would provide you with housing, job support, therapy services. Everything. But only if the girls want it too. That night he sat them down. You don't have to stay, he said, voice cracking. They said you can go to a nice home. A real family. With a yard. A school. A room just for you. Callie took his hand. Clara leaned into his shoulder. We already have a family, Clara said. You, Callie whispered. You're the one we drew in the picture. Ethan blinked hard. You mean the house with the red door? No, Clara smiled. The man holding our hands. Epilogue. 1 year later. The small house on Mill Street had a red door now, painted by Callie and Clara themselves. Inside, Ethan sat on the couch reading while Lucky, the mutt from the shelter, snored at his feet. The girls were laughing in the next room, dressing up for their school's superhero day. They had decided to go as Super Dad and the Miracle Twins. Ethan smiled. He hadn't saved them. They'd saved him.